He could not see anything. Not the horizon, not the helicopter flying beside him. 3 feet away, not his own hands on the controls. The cockpit window was pure brown, a wall of sand so thick it had swallowed the entire desert whole. The instruments were flickering. The engine was groaning, and from somewhere behind him, in the dark belly of the aircraft, he could feel 30 soldiers sitting in total silence, because there was nothing left to say. 600 miles from safety, 200 miles from Tehran, the most powerful military on Earth, invisible, lost, and running out of time. And then the helicopter drifted sideways. What happened next, in the next 40 seconds, would end a presidency, humiliate a superpower, and change the American military forever. Not because the enemy was waiting, not because anyone had been betrayed, but because of sand, and one cracked rotor blade, and a chain of decisions made by desperate men in the dark. This is Operation Eagle Claw. The embassy guards noticed the crowd first. Nothing unusual, they thought. Protests outside the compound had become almost routine since the revolution. Students gathered, they chanted, they went home. It happened every few weeks. But this morning, the crowd was not going home. They came from every direction at once. Not dozens, thousands, scaling the walls, rushing the gates, pouring through every entrance before a single proper alarm could be raised. Inside, American staff ran through corridors, grabbing whatever classified files they could reach, feeding documents into shredders, smashing hard drives with anything nearby, burning papers in trash cans. One officer later said it felt like trying to hold back the ocean with his hands. By midday, 66 Americans were on the embassy floor, hands bound, eyes covered. Outside the windows, the sound of thousands celebrating in the streets of Tehran. To the students who had stormed the walls, this was not an act of terror. This was justice. For decades, America had backed the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a ruler whose secret police, Savak, had imprisoned, tortured, and killed thousands of Iranian citizens. When the revolution finally came in 1979 and the Shah fled, he fled to America. To the students on those walls, the embassy was not a diplomatic building. It was the headquarters of everything that had been done to their country, whether you stood inside those walls or outside them. What happened on November 4th, 1979, looked completely different. Jimmy Carter had not slept properly in months. The Oval Office desk was covered in reports, failed negotiations, rejected proposals, diplomatic cables that went unanswered. He had tried everything a president could try without firing a single shot. Back-channel talks through Algeria, pressure through the United Nations. He had frozen $12 billion of Iranian government assets sitting in American banks. $12 billion, believing the financial pain would force a resolution within weeks. Weeks became months. Nothing moved. Every evening, the American networks closed their news broadcasts with the same line. Walter Cronkite, calm and deliberate, looking into the camera. And that is the way it is. Day 152 of the Iran hostage crisis. The number changed every night. The situation did not. Carter's approval ratings had collapsed. The country was angry, humiliated, and the man in the Oval Office was the face of both. In April 1980, with the presidential election 7 months away and Ronald Reagan gaining ground every week, Carter's generals came to him with a different kind of option. Not a negotiation, something the Pentagon had been building in secret for months, a rescue mission. Colonel Charlie Beckwith spread the maps across the table and walked the president's team through it for the first time. Beckwith was blunt, direct, the kind of soldier who said exactly what he thought regardless of rank in the room. He had built Delta Force from nothing 2 years earlier, modeling it on the British SAS, fighting for years to get the funding, the training, the right men. Eagle Claw was going to be its first real mission, and Beckwith intended it to be perfect. The plan moved in 2 nights. On the first night, 8 Navy RH-53D Sea Stallion helicopters would lift off from the USS Nimitz, an aircraft carrier sitting in the Arabian Sea, far beyond Iranian radar. 600 miles of dark desert between the carrier and the target. The helicopters would fly low, lights off, staying under radar the entire way, landing at a remote salt flat in the Yaz Desert 200 miles southeast of Tehran. Codename Desert 1, 6C-13. Hercules transport aircraft would already be waiting at Desert 1. Fuel, equipment, and 93 Delta Force soldiers who had spent months training on a full-scale replica of the Tehran embassy. Every room, every corridor, every guard position, rehearsed hundreds of times until it lived in their muscles. The helicopters would refuel at Desert 1, load the soldiers, fly to a second hiding point, Desert 2, closer to Tehran. Wait through an entire day, hidden. Then on the second night, move on the embassy under total darkness, overwhelm the guards, extract the hostages, and vanish before Iran could mount any organized response. In the briefing room, it looked clean, precise, unstoppable. Beckwith had one private concern he kept coming back to. The plan had too many moving parts, too many things that had to go exactly right. In his experience, real operations never went exactly right, but the alternative, doing nothing, was not something anyone in that room was willing to accept. The carrier sat dark on the water. No unusual signals, no visible activity from any passing ship, from any Iranian radar station, just another night at sea. Below deck, Delta Force soldiers made final preparations in near total silence. Faces darkened, weapons checked and rechecked. Each man carrying in his head the layout of a building 400 miles away he had never physically entered but knew better than his own home. Nobody was talking. There was nothing left to say that the months of training had not already covered. On the flight deck, 8 Sea Stallion helicopters powered up one by one. The noise rolled across the dark water, a deep mechanical thunder that had nowhere to go out here except into the night. Pilots ran through final checks: fuel, navigation, communication, everything green. The first helicopter lifted off the deck and tilted west into the black sky. Then the second, then the third. One by one, all 8 rising and banking toward Iran, running lights off, radio communication reduced to minimum. 8 dark shapes dissolving into the dark. 600 miles away, the hostages were asleep. The guards were at their posts, cold and bored. Nobody in Tehran, nobody anywhere in Iran, had any idea what was moving through the sky toward them. For exactly 1 hour, everything went perfectly. The pilot of the lead helicopter saw it before he flew into it. A wall, brown and solid, stretching across the entire horizon. Not a cloud, not rain, a haboob. A desert sandstorm so dense it looked less like weather and more like the ground itself had risen up. There was no route around it. It was too wide, and turning back was not something any of these men were willing to do. Not after everything. Not with 66 Americans waiting. The helicopters flew straight in. Inside the cockpits, the world disappeared. Windshields turned solid brown. Instruments flickered as sand forced its way into sensors and circuits. Pilots who had been flying in tight formation could no longer see the aircraft beside them, 3 feet away, invisible. They were flying on instruments alone, at low altitude, over terrain none of them had ever physically seen. In the back of each aircraft, soldiers sat in complete darkness and said nothing. A warning light came on. Hydraulic pressure. The crew ran the diagnostics. In normal conditions, manageable. In this storm, at this altitude, on this mission, the pilot made the call that every military pilot dreads making. Eagle 8 turning back. Hydraulic failure. We are RTB. He banked the helicopter east and disappeared back toward the Nimitz. 1 helicopter gone. The navigation system gave a reading that made no sense, the pilot corrected. The system gave another impossible reading. He corrected again. The instruments that were supposed to tell him exactly where he was in 500 miles of dark desert were failing. Without navigation, Desert 1 was invisible. Tehran was invisible. Everything was invisible. Eagle 6 declaring nav failure. Cannot locate Desert 1. Aborting. He turned back. 2 helicopters gone. 6 remaining. The mission required a minimum of 6 to proceed. They were already at the limit, and they hadn't landed yet. The C-130Os had been on the ground for over an hour. The ground team was positioned. Fuel bladders were laid out across the salt flat. Everything was ready and waiting. The location had been chosen for one reason. Nothing ever happened here. A dead flat emptiness so remote that the planners had assumed, with confidence, that they would have it entirely to themselves for the 2 hours they needed. They were wrong. The first headlights appeared without warning. A fuel tanker truck rolling through the darkness, straight into the middle of the operation. The driver had no idea what he had found. He did not stop when signaled. A rocket ended the standoff. The tanker exploded. A fireball that lit several miles of Iranian desert in every direction. In the middle of their perfectly secret mission, they had built a bonfire visible from space. There was nothing to do but keep moving. Then a bus appeared. 44 Iranian civilians traveling through the desert at night, driving directly into the operation. The soldiers stopped it, detained everyone, added 44 new witnesses to a mission that was supposed to have none. The mechanic ran his hand along the rotor blade of helicopter number 2 during the post-landing inspection. His flashlight caught something. He stopped, ran his hand back over the same spot. A crack, deep in the blade, invisible from any distance in any light, but under the stress of a combat insertion, carrying soldiers over Tehran, maneuvering at speed and low altitude, a cracked rotor blade meant the helicopter would come apart in the air. He found his commanding officer. Sir, rotor blade crack on Eagle 2. She cannot fly the mission. 5 operational helicopters. The plan required 6. That number had not been chosen randomly. 6 was the absolute minimum needed to carry all soldiers and all hostages out of Tehran if one more aircraft was lost during the rescue itself. With 5, a single additional failure anywhere between Desert 1 and the embassy meant people would be left behind. Colonel Beckwith stood in the desert at 2 in the morning, burning wreckage on the horizon, sand in his teeth, and did the hardest thing a soldier can do. He picked up the satellite radio. The message went up the chain in less than 3 minutes. From Beckwith in the desert, to the command aircraft circling overhead, to Washington, to the Situation Room of the White House where Jimmy Carter sat at the head of a table surrounded by his most senior military and civilian advisors. The room was quiet in the way rooms only go quiet when everyone already knows what is coming. 5 operational helicopters, Mr. President. Mission parameters require 6. Colonel Beckwith recommends abort. Carter looked at the operational report. He looked at his generals. He thought about 66 Americans who had been waiting 172 days for someone to come. He thought about what happened if the mission continued with 5 helicopters and 1 more failed over Tehran. American soldiers stranded inside Iran. A rescue becoming a disaster. A crisis becoming a catastrophe. He thought about all of it in a few seconds. Abort the mission. 3 words that would define the rest of his life. The abort order hit Desert 1 like a physical weight. Delta Force soldiers who had trained for a single purpose for the better part of a year stood in an Iranian desert in the middle of the night and were told to turn around. The hostages would stay. The mission was over. Go home. The pilots began repositioning the aircraft for departure. It was complicated. The helicopters had to maneuver to allow the C-130s to take off first, and the desert floor was crowded with aircraft, equipment, people, all of them moving in the dark while a burning tanker truck lit everything in flickering orange. One helicopter pilot was repositioning his aircraft, fighting the rotor wash that was kicking sand into the air and dropping visibility to near zero when he lost his reference point. The aircraft drifted, slowly at first. The rotor blade caught the C-130 at cockpit level. The fuel ignited instantly. The fireball rose into the Iranian night sky. Orange and black, enormous, visible for miles in every direction. 8 men died in that fire. 5 United States Air Force airmen. 3 United States Marines. In the chaos and heat and screaming alarms, the surviving soldiers loaded onto the remaining aircraft as fast as physically possible. There was no time to recover the dead. No time to destroy the abandoned helicopters. No time to collect the weapons, the equipment, the classified maps now sitting loose on Iranian soil. The aircraft lifted off and left Desert 1 behind. Below them, 5 intact American helicopters sitting in a row on an Iranian salt flat. Around them, burning wreckage. And in the middle of it all, 8 men who would not be coming home. When Iranian forces reached Desert 1 in the early morning light, they stood in silence for a moment before anyone spoke. 5 American military helicopters, largely intact, sitting in a row as if someone had simply parked them and walked away. Classified military documents scattered across the sand. American weapons, American equipment, and the burned remains of men and machines on Iranian soil. For the Iranian government, what they found at Desert 1 confirmed everything they had been saying since the revolution, that America viewed Iran not as a sovereign nation, but as a problem to be managed, a country to reach into whenever it suited them. The wreckage was not just evidence of a failed rescue, it was, in their view, evidence of American arrogance meeting its limit. Ayatollah Khomeini addressed the Iranian people that day. He told them that the storm, the failures, the crash, these were not accidents. In his belief, and in the belief of millions of Iranians who heard him, divine protection had stopped the operation. America had sent its finest machines and its finest soldiers. The desert had taken them. Whether you saw those images from Tehran or from Washington, what you felt looking at them was completely different. To Americans, it was humiliation. To Iranians, it was proof. Both of those things were real. Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter in November 1980 by one of the largest margins in modern American electoral history. Carter himself would write later that his failure to free the hostages was the central reason he lost. Not the economy, not policy, not ideology. One mission, one night in a desert. The rest of everything followed from there. Ronald Reagan stood on the steps of the Capitol and took the oath of office as the 40th President of the United States. The crowds cheered. The bands played. The ceremony unfolded exactly as it had dozens of times before. And in Tehran, at Mehrabad Airport, a plane sat on the runway with its engines running. 52 American hostages on board. The deal had been finalized the night before through Algerian mediators, the Algiers Accords, signed at midnight. The hostages were cleared to leave. The paperwork was done. Everything was ready. Iran held the plane on the ground. They watched the inauguration on television. They watched the clock, and the plane did not move, did not lift a single wheel off the runway until Ronald Reagan finished his oath of office, until the precise moment Jimmy Carter was no longer the President of the United States. 444 days, and the ending was timed to the minute. Carter, sitting on the platform behind the new president, was told quietly that the plane had taken off. He said nothing. He looked straight ahead. There was nothing left to say. The 8 men who died at Desert 1 are buried at Arlington National Cemetery. For years after the mission, because Eagle Claw remained classified, their families could not be told exactly where or how they had died. They knew their fathers, their brothers, their sons had not come back. The rest was silence. The failures of that single night rebuilt the American military from the inside. The 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, was created because of those helicopters in the Iranian desert. The United States Special Operations Command, SOCOM, which today oversees the Navy SEALs, Delta Force, and every elite American unit, was built directly on the lessons of Eagle Claw. Every Special Operations helicopter pilot in the American military today trains for the exact conditions that destroyed the mission on April 25, 1980. The wound between Washington and Tehran that opened in 1979 never fully closed. The frozen assets, the broken trust, the competing grievances, American diplomats taken hostage, Iranian democracy dismantled by a CIA-backed coup decades earlier. Both of these things happened. Both of these things matter. And the weight of all of it still sits between the two countries today, in every negotiation, every confrontation, every moment of tension that has followed in the 40-plus years since. At Desert 1, the salt flat looks the same as it always did. Flat, empty, quiet. The desert took back everything. Sand covered the marks left by aircraft and fire and men. The wind erased the footprints. But the night of April 24, 1980, the Night 8 helicopters flew into a sandstorm and a superpower discovered its limits. That does not wash away so easily.